August 22nd, 2026. Well, following on the theme of my previous video, in which I emphasized that in reality, the Democrat Party has long been the U.S.'s socialist party. And the DSA people represent just an extreme, let's admit it to everybody and proclaim it from the mountaintop or sort of viewpoint. And many of them are actually basically what I call the neo-Marxists. They are, or you could call them communists, although to try to say that they're necessarily the same thing as, say, what was in the Soviet Union, for example, or today in China, they seem to have more of an anarchist bent. But remember, if you're running a revolution, you often create a state of anarchy to overthrow the old system before you impose a new rule. So don't trust them on anything like that. The idea that these people are really going to get rid of prisons and police is ridiculous. What they're going to do is orient the police toward us, not the actual criminal element. and I think we would be the ones they would probably want to put in prison, actually. But that's this DSA group, I mean, and who knows what'll happen. But I think what I really want to focus on here is something a little bit more tame, let's say, and that is their campaign for this idea of Medicare for All, which I guess is a Bernie Sanders themed idea, which I guess it basically is just to say, well, let's just take the Medicare program that exists now, I guess, and just let everybody be eligible for it. Well, I don't know. Is that you got 200 and what is it, $9.20, whatever, something like that per a month for people below a certain reasonable income level. Would cover almost everybody, I guess, except the more, well, affluent people, maybe. Some people are in a thing called IRMA, which is another issue. But, and then they get Medicare for what, 80% of their expenses? Or are they going to extend it and make it 100% for everybody and just put all that stuff out of business too? That's hard to know. But the problem is with this is that a reality about Medicare as it is right now will show why this is a complete economic disaster. First of all, Medicare doesn't really pay for itself anyhow, right? You have to understand that there's a thing there's two aspects of Medicare that have come out now. There's basically the classic Medicare, and then there's this Medicare Advantage, or sometimes called Part C. Okay, and the thing about that is that under Medicare, basic Medicare, the classic type, most people get a co-insurance, which is still from a private insurance company, United Healthcare or Aetna or whatever, right? Or, if to cover the other 20% that it doesn't cover. Okay. Now, so that's one aspect of the whole scheme, and the thing about it is to use that, you have to have a doctor that takes assignment, which means that they set the rates that they're willing to pay for various treatments and services, and the doctor that was willing to take that as the amount of payment, then you can go to Medicare for that doctor if he's willing to take you. Okay, and that rate is pretty much well below what you might call a market rate. It's well below what the private insurances and corporate insurances pay for the same thing. Okay. And then the other aspect and advantage is, well, it's sort of like a corporate insurance, but they've negotiated the rates, and I guess they also realize that the doctors and the hospitals realize that they're going to either face that or they're going to face standard Medicare assignments. So I don't know how that compares to other programs, such as, for instance, the actual corporate plans that people have when they're working, right? Or at least in corporations that provide reasonable benefits. So what that means is, in practice, is that a lot of the medical expenses, the actual costs, are being paid by the private insurance and the corporate insurance, okay? Because they're paying more. And what the Medicare is paying is less, and it all averages out to whatever the real cost is, or else the doctor or hospital would go out of business, okay? So essentially, that's kind of what's happening right now. So if you bring in everybody into the Medicare structure, that means that with assignment, it won't be enough to cover the actual costs, and you'll see hospitals going out of business, doctors. I mean, it'll be a collapse of the medical system. So essentially, they'd have to get away from assignment and just start paying market rates, which means the cost of Medicare not only for the seniors, but for everybody else would go up significantly. Which means you'd have to have some substantial taxes imposed on, I guess, everybody, businesses and individuals, in order to pay for all of it. So it is a rate for a massive tax increase. But even at that point, with the extra demand, you would flood the actual provider system with more demand than it probably can handle, which means that people are going to have a harder time getting their doctor appointments and so forth, or getting scheduled for surgeries or whatever, because of all the extra demand. Now throw also the other leftist demand that they want is to make all these illegal immigrants legalized. And all of a sudden, these people all flood into the system too. So this is a perfect reason why particularly anybody that's a senior and on Medicare right now, or Advantage, either one, should be totally opposed to this, because it's a really crazy thing to do, and it would be really a detriment. Not only that, people with good corporate plans that have been negotiated by their unions, or simply what they get for, to be as a part of the professional workforce, which is probably pretty much the same as what the unions are getting. Essentially, a lot of these people are already, like in Michigan, are pushing back on El Said because of this. I noticed it on the news today, because they realize they're going to have a worse situation if this actually were to pass than what they have right now. Now, maybe homeless people on the street might have a better situation if they have the sanity to actually go to the doctor, but that's a different issue. But the problem is, so this is kind of what I'm saying, that, we have a lot of benefits out there already for all these people, anyhow, such as Medicaid, and why they would want to throw the whole structure we have away now to put in this socialized system, which, remember, then the government will decide what you get for care and what you don't get for care. And as you find almost all socialized systems, whether in Britain and Canada or whatever, there's going to be waiting lines and restrictions on what kind of treatment you can get. So anyway, that's a good reason to oppose all these crazy DSA proposals. If you like these videos, please subscribe here. Give me a like, and you can click the bell for notifications. Or also, you can follow me on Rumble, which I post there as well. So anyway, so that's kind of what I see about this sort of Democrat push here. And of course, the more radical Democrats are for this. The more moderate ones at least don't talk about it. Of course, if they get in power, they may all be coerced into doing it. And remember what happened during the Obamacare thing and how that went through. That in the end, they got every Democrat. They actually literally got to the 60-vote threshold on that one to get through the filibuster, and actually managed to get one guy, and the final guy he was in Nebraska, that went for it and ended up losing a seat over it, but he went and did it. So I think we understand that that's a very good reason not to vote Democrat. And certainly if you're paying 40 cents a gallon or 50 cents a gallon more for gas for a short period of time, that's a ridiculous reason to vote for the Democrats. And I think this needs to be put out also. I mean, the Democrats definitely mean higher taxes, and anybody thinks inflation is going to be lower under Democrats as a general rule, I think would be being a little bit absurd. Actually, Trump did pretty good the first year in, and then this war, which we can discuss the war, and that's kind of a side issue of foreign policy, which has had an impact. But I think that overall, I think there's a good case to not support any of this craziness that the Democrats have in mind. And remember that because of the system we have the best healthcare system in the world. So, that's something to consider here as far as the best treatments, the best practices, and everything. So anyhow, other things I guess we are looking at the ongoing situation. I guess the war is kind of tamped down to a sort of a low level. There's something to talk about, some extra economic sanctions. We'll see how that all plays out. But I think the big thing is it looks like that at some level we are getting a certain amount of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. I guess so. I think from a practical point of view, we are still blockading the Iranian oil shipments pretty effectively, which is putting economic pressure on them. And it's going to take a while for that to work. The other issue I always come back to is China, because I mean, China actually needs oil from them, and I think that at some point, their reserves are going to run low too, just like some of ours have. I mean, they apparently maintain a higher level of reserves than we did, and certainly we squandered a lot of ours during the Biden period. And we went in this and the Congress failed to appropriate the money, and nobody really fought over it last year to actually buy a bunch of oil when it was cheap last year and fill up the petroleum reserve so we'd have it this year. And certainly if anybody was thinking about having a conflict like this, that should have been a preparation for it, obviously. So anyhow, so that's kind of the way that went. And one last thing I want to put in this video here, I may actually do a special video where I will introduce this thing in more detail, but I'll go ahead and say it's available now. I'd said earlier that I had been on the space show, I guess it was on June the 2nd, so it took a while to get that one through because there was a backlog because of some health issues and other issues that the host had. And he had been also putting some of the more recent shows out for a while first, but now this one finally came out, fortunately. And it's where I'm discussing the UAP releases that the Department of War has put out. And I think this one was done, I believe, after the second or third tranche had come out. I think maybe the second, actually. At any rate, it was one of the early ones, but there was actually some pretty good videos in this. And the ones that have come out since then really have been more or less along the same line. And there were actually, see here, two really good videos were released in that also, which apparently had been previously released by the journalist Geoffrey Corbell. And unfortunately on this, I failed to expand the video as good as I could. Probably if you're watching on a computer, like face to face, I think you can see it okay. It was one that was put out by Eric Burleson, the representative from Missouri, also, which is pretty good, interesting one. The rest of them are largely looks like orbs or similar kind of objects at a distance being tracked by various platforms. And there's some that actually have, a couple that actually have saucers in them. As I always said, where have all the saucers gone? All these orbs nowadays. But remember the orbs, the Foo Fighters back in World War II were orbs also. My suspicion is those are robotic craft, but who knows? Some of the other bigger ones I think are inhabited, if you want to call them that, or you don't call them alien, do you? Whatever, NHI, whatever. So anyhow, anyway, I'll post a link to that in the description below for people that can get a look at that. It is about an hour and 50 minutes, so it's a lengthy video, but it does go through a lot. I actually go through a lot of discussion about it, and then we go through present several of these videos where we kind of narrate and discuss what I think about them and what about what we should be thinking about those videos. So anyway, so that'll be it for this time. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the descriptions of my social media addresses will be in the description below as well. So all for now.